Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Business Today Television. The recent G20 summit at New Delhi was a success. And one of the key elements that emerged from the unanimous leaders' declaration was a call for reform to ensure that multilateral development banks become bigger, better, and more efficient. I'm today joined by the two co-chairs of the special expert group that led to this. Lawrence Summers, prominent economist, former Treasury Secretary of the United States of America and President Emeritus of Harvard University. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. Also with us, Mr. N.K. Singh, a name everyone knows in India, prominent Indian economist, academician, and a policy maker with many decades of public service in India. He was the chair of the 15th Finance Commission and is currently the president of the Institute of Economic Growth. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you, Professor Summers, about a recent talk where you said the world is on fire, and then you linked it to the reform of the multilateral banking system, a system that's been there for many decades now. What led you to this conclusion?
There are two parts of it. The first is the degree of global challenge we face right now. Millions of square miles of land were destroyed in fires this past summer, and that's just indicative of what is happening with the challenge of global climate change, which clearly raises such profound issues for the future of humanity. At the same time, we still face substantial pandemic threats. My guess is that we'll see another challenge like COVID within 2 decades. We see for the first time in a very long time major war in Europe with substantial spillover consequences in terms of grain prices, food availability for much of the world. So it's a very dangerous moment in the world. And at the same time, it is a moment that is pregnant with opportunity to make lives better. We've seen more progress over the last 25 years in bringing down child mortality, in bringing up literacy than we have seen at any point in the past. And given how far those rates of child mortality have come down, then we will see at any point in the future. And if we want to keep that progress going in the face of these challenges, we need more capital to flow to the developing world. We need it to flow in better, stronger ways that address these key global challenges. And that is the function of global development banks. Uniquely among international organizations, they don't just bring nations together to talk, they bring nations together to do on common planetary problems. Uniquely among ways in which governments can devote their money, they have extraordinary leverage. A dollar appropriated by the United States, in some contexts, can generate $25 of lending to the developing world. And they represent the world's most serious effort yet at genuine global governance, because their real decision-making is taking place by all the shareholders, including rich countries and developing countries alike. And that's why it seems to me they need to be the tip of the spear as we address these global challenges and try to keep the global opportunities coming. And that's the central theme of our report. And then we go into a wide variety of more specific issues, the importance of tripling the level of funding by the end of this decade, the importance of their doing their business in new ways, ways that work much more closely with the private sector, ways that work much more closely with each other,
right,
ways that use innovative finance. If we're able to do all of that, I think this is a moment with all the problems that is also pregnant with opportunity.
Absolutely, and opportunity is something that is important for India. Mr. Singh, when the global financial crisis happened, by one estimate, over $222 billion were deployed by the banks into addressing that particular crisis. There is data which suggests that post-COVID and the response to COVID, the spending has been much lower. Is this, according to you, a classic example of why MDBs need to be fixed? And while you tell us about that, what role do you think India has played in this entire debate?
Well, I think that let me begin from the last part of your question, the role of India. Even before India assumed the presidency of the World Bank, the Prime Minister had repeatedly emphasized the need to restructure the Multilateral Development Bank as an integral part of restructuring the overall international financial architecture. Indeed, if you look at the discussions of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi during his last visit to the United States, the paragraph 40 of that very meaningful set of recommendations contained in that is about strengthening the multilateral development banks. So as a group, at the time of the Bangalore second meeting of the governors of central bank and finance ministers, decided to constitute a group of which both of us are privileged to be the co-conveners. It has a distinguished membership, and we have been able to give a report which, as Larry pointed out, is basically a triple mandate. What's the triple? The triple is that in addition to poverty issues and shared prosperity, which remain, of course, unalienable, poverty numbers have gone up, shared prosperity has gone down. And so in addition to that, of course, we now have the issue of global challenges, of transboundary issues, of climate, of pandemic, of fragility of countries, of the high debt profile, and large parts in which you require to have substantially higher levels of concessional and non-concessional finance. That is why, in our recommendation, in short, we have suggested that what is needed is roughly $3 trillion a year between now and the end of this decade. Out of that, $2 trillion will come from countries' own domestic resource mobilization. The $1 trillion will come half from the private capital, $500 billion, and half from a significantly enhanced concessional and non-concessional forms. To give you a broad estimate, currently, all MDBs taken together, and they are quite a large number, much larger than you think. They are currently, I think, certainly 16 or 17, if not more. Of course, we know the prominent ones, the World Bank Group, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We know the more prominent ones, but as a family, they are fairly large. And all taken together, roughly, leaving out the bump in the pandemic year, they lent about only $120 billion. If our recommendations are accepted, we expect that this, taken along with concessional finance, will be closer to the $400 billion mark, which is tripling on the concessional finance, which is IDA, which is needed to address issues of poverty and for countries and low-income countries, and of course very substantially augmented International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which will address both middle-income countries and lower-income countries. So that's the central piece. That, as Larry pointed out, is about two critical ingredients. One, in optimizing their balance sheet and improving the efficiency and quality and the way in which they function, and of course to harness private capital more imaginatively.
Professor Summers, this sounds like a new deal for the entire multilateral architecture, but I want to sort of take this beyond that. We are living in a world where there is a lot of economic uncertainty. We are also seeing the economic order that we've seen in the last 30, 40 years unravel a bit. US and China decoupling, regional trade being preferred over multilateral trade, the state that the WTO is in. Is what you are suggesting in terms of the multilateral development bank reform linked to the broader situation that we are seeing as far as deglobalization, if I may use that word, is concerned?
It is a very different problem to build new highway than it is to fix a highway on which traffic needs to flow.
And India is
But
building
that
so
needs
many
to
highways.
but that needs to be rebuilt. And so I think that the way of managing globalization going forward is of the second kind. We can't stop and deliberate on what the optimal system is going to be and then put it in place. That was the luxury they had in many ways, given that the Second World War had destroyed almost everything in 1944. That's not the kind of choice that policymakers have today. So inevitably, it's going to be a process of rolling and incremental reform, and it's for people like NK and I to try to point up what seem to us to be the low-hanging fruit, the areas where the most can be accomplished with the least disruption.
India's digital stack is being spoken about, and we've seen practically millions and millions of Indians, hundreds of millions actually, being benefited by digital technologies and at a scale which was not imagined even 5 years ago. How do you see this Indian digital revolution that everyone is talking about?
It's an extraordinary thing. You know, if you think about it, this is a cutting-edge technology, and it's a cutting-edge technology that is more pervasively available at much lower cost in India than it is in the United States. When electricity was a cutting-edge technology, that wasn't true. When television was a cutting-edge technology, that wasn't true. When the jet plane was a cutting-edge technology, that wasn't true. And so this idea of leadership from behind is, I think, a very powerful idea in this new world, and I think it points to enormous potential for India and a very large role for India in the global system, because India has shown a capacity to master the digital that I think is many people are going to want to emulate, that's going to create many opportunities for Indian firms and Indian entrepreneurs. You know, last time I was here 5 or 6 years ago in India, I remarked, and I think it was an accurate remark, that in no year in the past 30 had India grown as rapidly as China had. Well, I think the overwhelming likelihood is that over the next decade, India is going to grow significantly more rapidly than China does, and that's going to have a very important set of implications for India's role in the world.
Mr. Singh, how important will the India-US relationship be to deliver that kind of growth? Also because we see this personal chemistry of sorts between President Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. How important will that be? And you have observed the India-US relationship perhaps longer than anyone in public life in India.
So I think that there is absolutely no disagreement that the Indo-US partnership has really deeply strengthened in recent years, both under the leadership of President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. And I think that we have increasingly become partners in multiple ways, apart from economic cooperation in the area of strategic issues, in the area of, for instance, defense and metrics, in terms of procurement policy, and of course extending to the social sphere in the education and healthcare systems. I see that partnership gather much greater momentum. And I believe in something that Larry just mentioned, that it's not deglobalization. If you ask me, the world is become rapidly a village. It was many years ago that somebody had used the expression, the world is flat. But I think nobody had at that time contemplated the transformational power of digital technology combined with artificial intelligence, which is going to significantly alter everything which we have known in the way in which educational institutions are run, the pedagogy of the systems, the ability to mix many kinds of disciplines. The new India's educational policy, to some extent, embeds that thought of really mixing up the best talent in terms of mixing a multiplicity of disciplines. In no other way, for instance, can we harness agriculture more imaginatively than, for instance, as we were discussing, that less and less dependence on fossil fuel kind of things in terms of the fertilization, in terms of the use of irrigation and water, cropping patterns which are more in consummate with the needs of environmental management and planning. And I think that India is at the cusp of change when we are seeing this kind of transformational, not only in terms of the impact on overall growth trends, but the decisive impact in the entire social matrix of the way in which people act, behave, they move, in terms they conduct their agricultural operations, and a long way still to go on health and education. But given all this momentum which has been built up under this leadership, that is something which will bring about transformational changes in multiple ways which are beyond our recognition today.
Professor Summers, you recently spoke about India's growth, and you said it can achieve eightfold growth by the middle of the century at 8% annual growth. Given what's happening in the overall economy and how that's impacting individual countries, exports, what do you think India needs to do to achieve that kind of growth?
India needs to be lucky in there being a successful, growing, peaceful, all things considered, safe global economy. Because India won't achieve that growth without the global environment being congenial. India needs to have reform in key sectors, in agriculture, with respect to aspects of the tax system and the banking system, probably most crucially issues of what we would call fiscal federalism in the United States, issues having to do with regional governments and national governments and the relationship between them. So reforms. Third, India needs to continue to be more open to the world. You know, more American students were visiting college students in Costa Rica last year than were visiting college students in India. That's in part because of the parochialism of some of our college students, but that's in part because there's been less opportunity to recruit, attract, and involve them in India than there should have been. That's one example of the incredible opportunities that India can have from openness. They include benefiting from the extraordinary diaspora of non-resident Indians. They include fostering connections and promoting trade and welcoming inbound investment. India is still too inward-looking, even after all the improvements of the last decade. And last,
if I may interrupt you, why would you say that? Why is it still inward-looking?
There are still more restrictions, more need for licenses. If someone wants to come and get a business, there was more challenge associated with my getting a long-run visa in order to come for this trip to India and subsequent trips than with respect to most other countries that I would visit. I'm not sure all the reasons. I suspect it's mostly the tradition of a large, inward-oriented society, and that takes a long time to change those traditions. So government's role in shaping the direction of key sectors, particularly the digital sector and the energy sector, along with openness, along with reform, along with a congenial international environment. With those four things, I think that India can dare to hope for 8% growth. And if we think about an India with an economy 8 times as large as the one that it has today, that is something that would change the lives of every Indian and would change the global economy in a very profound way.
Like India, which is beset with its own challenges, but the huge ability to grasp opportunities is a matter which should fill all of us with a sense of pride.
We started the conversation with your term on the world being on fire, and the conclusion that I draw from the time that both of you have given us is that India can perhaps help douse that fire in many meaningful ways. Professor Summers, N.K. Singh, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on this conversation. 2 leading minds who have given us a broad picture of what is really key to the world of tomorrow. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.